remember her like literally Googling communication degrees and Greenwich coming up as an option. And then I think when I came here, we were talking about it today as we were walking through the grounds, you know, the experience you get from being in London for a start, the connections you can make is amazing here. You're a stone throw away from central London.
Welcome to the Greenwich Means Business Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Greenwich Means Business Podcast. I'm Dr. Nicky Garsten, Associate Professor in Communications, and I'm delighted to welcome back Siobhan Filsell, who graduated from a PR and Communications degree with a first-class degree and who now works for Two Circles as a lead consultant advising sports organisations about how to communicate directly with their fans.
Thanks for having me.
So, looking back on your studies and back on your career, can you identify 3 decisions that you're really pleased that you made?
I think where I'll start, and I think it's a really current topic at the moment, is coming to university itself. I think a lot of people at the moment are making the decision whether to go to university, to just get experience, and I think it's a real personal decision. But for me, and as you know, it was my family. It was the first time a family member had gone to university in my whole kind of near family. So that was a really big decision for me to make that I didn't regret at all for me personally. And then I suppose the second kind of decision I made was around just throwing myself into my course and really connecting with the people within my course, the connections I could make through my lecturers and kind of guest speakers that came into the business school to speak to us. I was the president of the PR fraternity for a year and really enjoyed it. So I would say like throwing myself into the course was kind of another great decision I made. And then I think thirdly, really applying myself when I was within the course in terms of trying to figure out, you learn so much and trying to figure out how that will shape my career and how I want to bring what I learn into what I enjoy. So my dissertation in the end ended up being how women in the PR industry sometimes struggle because it's the PR industry and industries overall have been built on a male framework. And so femininity and feminism was what I was very interested in and still are. And so therefore I brought kind of everything I'd learned in my course at the end together and really kind of applied what I enjoyed and brought kind of what I had learned all into one. So those are the kind of the three things that kind of spring to mind.
Lovely. And so that the first decision you're pleased with was going to university. So what made you choose the University of Greenwich?
I had a fabulous teacher in my sixth form at the time. I unfortunately went through a couple of health issues when I was between 16 and 18. And she was really great at coaching me through a really difficult time in my life. And I remember her being quite straight and a direct teacher, which she won't mind me saying. And one day she was like, Siobhan, you're just a really good talker and you need to go and do a communications degree. So I remember her like literally Googling communication degrees and Greenwich coming up as an option. And then I think when I came here, we were talking about it today as we were walking through the grounds, you know, the experience you get from being in London for a start, the connections you can make is amazing here. You're a stone throw away from central London, but you're sat in the most beautiful setting every day. And you should never pick a university based on the university buildings, but if you were, this would probably be one of kind of the top ones in the UK. And I think I loved that mixture of kind of city and kind of green spaces, parks, and almost like being a little village in a city that I loved. So that was kind of my journey to the University of Greenwich.
Lovely. And so you began at the University of Greenwich, and you've spoken about industry connections. Would you like to say a little bit more about those industry connections that you got from being based here?
So I ran the PR fraternity for a year, I think in my second year. I decided to create a speaker series where selfishly it enabled me to go out to a lot of really amazing individuals and ask whether they'd come speak for the fraternity, but also allowed me to make that personal connection with them as well. So within that speaker series, we had people like Dominic Smales, who was the founder of Glean Futures, which at the time was a really big top influencer agency. The likes of looked after the likes of Zoella, Marcus Butler, really big influencers when that influencer space started opening up. Colin Byrne, who at the time was CEO of Weber Shandwick, one of the top 5 PR consultancies in the world. We also had Jamie Oliver's creative director. So being part of the PR fraternity allowed me to make those connections. And then I think as part of the course, it was quite a priority from most lecturers, including yourself, to bring other people in to understand different ways of working, opinions, and also different topics that were in the industry. So I just made sure at every point that I was making those personal connections with those industry leaders or speakers that came in.
And I remember some of those events, and I still think of some of the content from those events. I think they were really helpful to have that in tandem with the degree and to have an academic society in that way that is enhancing student experience and knowledge, and also helping students to build up contacts and to apply what they're learning. So it was a really rich thing that was created there. So you were very active, you got a lot out of it, and I know too that when you first joined, loneliness was something that you thought about, which is very common for many students, and you're prepared to talk about it, which is really nice. So what do you recommend if somebody is feeling a little lonely?
I think I came from Devon, which was quiet community, little village. I'd lived in a lot of villages throughout my life. I grew up in Ireland, and so I think coming to a city like this is quite a juxtaposition. I remember feeling very overwhelmed, lonely. I was the first one in my family to go to university and go away for such a long time. So I think I really built quite a support system around me, whether that was friends, whether that was lecturers, whether that was even some of the speakers really that were coming in and asking advice, maybe not specifically on loneliness, but talking about how you evolve in these situations and use it almost in power to educate yourself of why you're feeling that way and to try and find a solution. So I think support system is super important. And secondly, for me, I think talking about it. I remember coming to you in particular and saying, this is how I'm feeling, and knowing that it's not a weakness. It's actually quite a positive and helpful conversation to have with somebody who can try and work through that solution with you. So support system, I think, and telling someone, having the conversation. And I think just knowing that having that conversation won't solve it all, but it will maybe even just in that moment, it will make you feel slightly better. And trying to rationalize it, because I think you can think in those lonely moments or those worrying moments, what am I doing here? How am I, the easiest decision is to go home. But actually, when you look back like I do, those moments felt so big. They're so small to me now. They're so small. So I think the two things I would always do is support system and telling somebody, having a conversation with somebody about it and not expecting to find a solution.
That's really helpful. And I remember you also saying that you found being busy helped, and you did throw yourself into a lot of different activities at the university.
Yes, and I think it's always important to understand why you're feeling a certain way, but don't let it overtake you. I think like I still suffer now with a bit of anxiety and a bit of what, like everyone does, right? I think no one in this world that we were having a conversation about previously, you know, we live in quite a high pressured, anxiety driven world at the moment. And I don't think anyone is kind of doesn't have anxiety or worries about something. So I think channeling that feeling into something else. Someone told me once you should always think about nervousness or anxiety as actually just a different form of excitement. And I think it's an interesting way of looking at it, because you can then kind of go forward rather than standing still with it. And so it's really important. It's always really important for me to kind of channel it somewhere and keep moving forward.
That's a really interesting way to think about it as a form of excitement. It feels positive and it feels dynamic when framed in that way. So we are recording this in the summer, and I'm wondering how you would advise students to use their summer breaks.
I think my biggest advice is to get some rest, relax, do something outside of kind of your course. So whether that's reading a book on a different industry, or whether that's getting a customer service job because you've never done it before. I think it's really important to take off the blinkers sometimes when you're running 100 miles an hour towards the goal of kind of getting a degree. And then I think secondly for me, if you can do internships or get some work experience in the field that you think you want to go into. My younger sister is actually at the University of Greenwich, and I think she's at a point now where she's kind of struggling to find exactly what she wants to do, but you don't need to do exactly what you want to do as an internship or as a work experience. It's actually just about gathering what you don't want to do and finding new skills and whatever it is. So I think those are the two things for me: get some rest and get some work experience if you can.
Excellent. And interesting that you talk about maybe doing something different. I remember when we were at Weber Shandwick, the head of creativity, saying, read something that is completely detached from what you would normally read.
Yeah.
And he used to read The New Scientist, and that for him helped inspire creativity. So we've spoken a bit about what it was like when you started, and then as you progressed through your degree and when you were president of PR Fraternity. Thinking now to the third year, which is the high pressure year, do you have any advice for students going into their third year?
I think it's really easy to put a lot of pressure on yourself. And it's not a bad thing, I don't think, and it's natural. I think try and rationalise those chaotic moments, especially those 6 weeks on the run up to kind of dissertation deadlines or whatever it is. Try and take yourself away, similar to what we were just talking about. Try to take yourself away in moments, because you will find more clarity in what you're doing if you're able to take a step back here and there to understand kind of what, if you're finding kind of a problem with something, or struggling to complete something, or don't really know what direction to take it. I still do it now, where I will take a step back for 24 hours or 2 hours or whatever the time allows, and come back to it. And I find that, you know, I've started to start having ideas in the shower recently, which is very odd, but like those moments are the moments that you then kind of find that clarity. So I would say, like, you know, you are always going to feel pressure. I think when people say, I'll take the pressure off, it's not possible in a third year. I know it. And I think just like make sure that you be rational in those moments where you can't find a solution or you can't do that piece of work. Take yourself away to find the clarity. There's no shame in that. I think people think that. I remember on my run up to my dissertation, I was working, you know, stupid hours, and on the last week I ended up taking 2 days off because I was so tired. But actually I remember that it all just coming together for me then, and I felt really like guilty about taking 2 days off before my deadline, but actually like it helped me pull everything together. So I think that would be my main advice when you're going through that very high pressured year.
So now thinking about how you've moved forward in your career, What kind of industries within PR did you decide to specialise in?
So I started at Golin, which was a consumer, I started in the consumer department, worked with a lot of FMCG brands, such as Magnum, Green and Blacks, Premier Inn, Essie Nail Polish. It was a real mixture. And I did that with the clear kind of thought process around I wanted to go into something that was fun and that I was interested in. I've always had a love for Formula One, and I realised that the peak of events was what I wanted to do.
Have a lot of events.
Yeah, 24. And so I realised that sport was something that I was already interested in my personal life, and I pulled into work. And so I started to then craft my career towards sport. So I joined an agency at the time that was called Clifford French, and it's now called 160over90. It was bought by IMG the year I joined. They did a lot of PR and comms, but they also did a lot of content work. Worked with brands such as Man United, Carlsberg, San Miguel, a lot of kind of big brands that had big partnerships. And then with my love of F1 kind of ever growing, moved to McLaren, got an opportunity to go and interview there. Started pretty low as an account executive and then worked my way up. But I think what I did and what was really interesting is I kind of stopped myself at the end within a year or a year and a half, 2 years at the agencies that I worked in, and was like, what am I enjoying here and what am I not enjoying? And then making that kind of educate me in my next move. And there's no shame in that as well. I think we were talking actually just before we started recording around staying at a company for a long time, which is amazing. But I also think we don't talk about enough of how amazing it is to also go to a number of different companies over a 2 to 3 year period to kind of get what you want to do in life and learn your skill set. So I made those moves throughout my career to really educate myself and what I wanted and what I enjoyed the most. And then I moved on to Andretti, which was a racing team, and worked to build their social team for 18 months. And then now I'm at Two Circles, running a team that looks after the Formula E and Formula 1 account.
Great. So I remember how keen you were on F1 when you were a student. So what exactly did your role at McLaren involve?
I was based in the communications team. I started there in 2019, September 2019. I never forget that. And as you said, it was a dream job for me. I remember crying when they rang me an hour after the second interview and said I had it. But I was put in the communications team. And at the time in 2019, Formula 1 and racing was not a big sport. It wasn't anything to the degree that it was today. So my role really entailed kind of looking at our brand and partner communications. It was super underdeveloped. Partner communications was really needed. And that essentially looked after what our commercial and partnership department did with our partners externally. So if it was a press release announcing extension to the partnership, we dealt with that. If it was an activation in Abu Dhabi at the race, we went and supported that. So a lot of my work was around kind of, I suppose, looking after the brand in terms of reputationally through our partners, and then also did a bit of brand communications work in terms of bringing racing and motorsport and McLaren out to lifestyle magazines or different events, getting influencers involved and really kind of building McLaren as a brand rather than a racing team. So that was kind of my clear focus when I was at the team.
Interesting. So, I mean, your career to date has been in PR and communications, and you did a degree in that. So how has the degree provided a foundation for what you've gone on to do?
I think I was thinking about it earlier when we were chatting. I think it really taught me a lot of skill set that I was able to then use in my career. And as I was saying before around, you come to a degree and you have to understand how you're going to use it to better to push your direction of where you're going. So I think for me, I used a lot of the skill set, even just of getting up and speaking to a speaker that I was really worried about speaking to, that skill set of communication, or we did a lot of modules focusing on kind of behaviour and looking at kind of different strategies and theories around PR as a whole. And so I think I used a lot of learning about how PR works from a traditional perspective and actually putting it into practice through what I enjoy. But I don't think everything that you're going to learn in the degree you're going to be able to use. I think you really have to pinpoint what you enjoy. And for me, it was around communication directly and behaviour and how people talk to each other, or how you communicate as a brand effectively, or whatever it is in that realm. That was kind of what I loved and really enjoyed working on and learning. So I just use that side of the degree in what I do in my day-to-day now, of managing a team even, and kind of managing a brand within Formula E. So I think that's kind of how I use the degree going forward.
And now you're working at Two Circles, and you're helping your clients build relationships with their fans. So what kind of strategies are you using to help organisations do that?
So I am in the content team in Two Circles. There were quite recently, the content team was acquired. It used to be called Livewire Sport, and then Two Circles acquired it because they wanted a content arm to their consultancy. So it's a really interesting place to be at the moment, because we have a marketing and communications department, a rights management department, a growth marketing department, lots of departments. So if you're a client, you're coming to us and we can actually facilitate quite a lot. So it's going through a really interesting phase, because as a kind of new and evolving business, we can offer our clients kind of a whole realm of teams and advice and consultancy on many different sides of things. So in the content, in content in particular, we advise clients on content and channel strategies. So looking at kind of how their brand's performing across social media, and what their content looks like. So my day-to-day is everything from looking after a team that manages all of Formula E's channels, to coming up with a great idea to announce next season's racing calendar. So it can be really broad, but I think predominantly we focus on channel strategy and content strategy, and then also helping our clients manage those social media channels on a day-to-day basis.
Interesting. So how do you go about managing a dialogue with the fans?
So I think we do a lot of research into how fans are consuming sport. So we work with a lot of our marketing and communications department. The kind of all departments come together and they do a lot of research into kind of what fans are consuming, where they're consuming it, and when they're consuming it. And we work with a number of rights holders in the business. So we use a lot of kind of the relationships we have with them and the day-to-day that we're working with them to also try and help build that sports fan and understand what that sports fan continues to want. But we work with a range of clients, from Wimbledon to F1 to Formula E to ATP, like the list goes on. We manage a lot of rights holders. So the knowledge and information we have as an agency and as teams, it is in a brilliant place to kind of build that fan and know what they want.
And just thinking about channels, because if we went back, 50 years, a lot of it would have been mediated through the media. And now organisations own quite a lot of channels where they're communicating directly with fans. So how do you kind of see that balance between the media and owned channels?
It's a really interesting one, because I think one you own and you can kind of manage. The other one you can own to a degree through relationships, but you can't necessarily control it. I think they both have their place, and I think it's really important to know that. One is something that you can control and you own yourself, but with media, you obviously can't control that. And sometimes you can own it to a degree through relationships. So I think they both have their place. I think direct to consumer is a super interesting topic overall at the moment, because we're finding, or you're seeing on social platforms, that's what the focus is from a lot of platforms at the moment. So Instagram and Facebook, for example, Meta launched broadcast channels across WhatsApp as well, which is essentially a notification platform that allows you to go direct to consumer. So if I'm looking at my phone, my mum's texted me, but also Formula One's also messaged me via WhatsApp directly. So I think direct to consumer is a super interesting conversation. I think they both have their right, and I think they will stay the same in terms of social and kind of the media landscape. But I think misinformation is also a really interesting topic at the moment, and making sure that we kind of we have those media outlets and they take responsibility on that side of what they're kind of discussing.
Yes, that's interesting, because if you look at social media where distortions can occur, are you saying that the media can be quite helpful in putting out accurate information?
Yeah, I think so, and I think I think the media can't lose that. It's an interesting example is kind of the royal family situation quite recently, with that photo that went out onto, picture agencies that would never have usually been accepted, and kind of I thought the media dealt with that really well in terms of coming out quite honestly and saying, we got it wrong here, and we aren't going to, we're going to take that photo away, and we aren't going to recommend using it. I think that needs to continue, of kind of making sure that the information that they use is right, and they have a huge responsibility as well to make sure it is correct. I think from a social channels perspective, it's a different kind of kettle of fish, because it's a brand and it's what the brand wants to say, and that's kind of totally different. I think from a media perspective, they have such a responsibility to not start sharing misinformation and be that trusted source, I suppose.
What other challenges do you see with sports PR?
I think we have quite a challenge at the moment on reliance on platforms. So we rely heavily on platforms to bring in followers, viewership, whatever it is, whatever your metric is that you track on. So I think that's an interesting topic at the moment, because I think relying on platforms so heavily, we know that they can be gone in an instant, or there can be a new one up the next day. So I think that's an interesting challenge, and it's interesting to start thinking less about platform strategy and more about content strategy, because that's potentially more a long-term view rather than a short-term view. I also think there's an interesting, I wouldn't call it issue or challenge, maybe I would call it a challenge. There is a challenge in recruitment at the moment, and talent development. I think we were speaking earlier around, there is a real expectation from the generation coming up into sports comms and sports social and content of what they want from a business, and what they want in terms of their first job or their second job, or the expectation that they have. I think we're going to have a very interesting challenge, and it's more of a challenge than an issue on talent development. I think recruitment, talent development, bringing in that new generation is going to be a real challenge for all businesses, not just the sports PR industry. That generation have an expectation of, and a new view of how a day-to-day role should work. And that's everything from kind of coffee breaks like we were talking about, or how much they should be doing in a day, or the hours that they work, the location they work in, whether it's remote. They have so many different ideas of what work looks like now, and I think it will be a challenge for businesses to understand how they adapt their business that was created in a totally different era with a totally different generation. So I think that's going to be a big challenge in terms of how how you adapt your business to kind of make sure that talent is still interested in joining you.
Yeah, and it's going to affect people of all generations working for the organisation when adaptations that you mentioned are made. I know that you're very interested in diversity. So do you have any thoughts about diversity within sports communications?
I think we're going through an interesting time where women in sport is a huge movement. I know myself, like when I joined, McLaren and earlier businesses in my career, like I was usually the lone woman in the room, or I was with other female colleagues, but they were only in comms, and the rest of the departments were very male, and not very diverse. So I think it's a really interesting time. I think we're at a stage now where we've educated a lot of women in what they can be doing to try and get into these roles or conduct a different way of conducting yourself in a business to try and get to become a leader. What I actually think needs to start happening at this stage is educating men as well around how you can support women in your business, or how you can support diversity in the business. It's a really interesting point to bring women together and talk about how you can kind of get into these roles or improve how you speak or feel more confident. But I actually think we're at a stage now where bringing men into that conversation is really important, because education is massively key in making sure that from a gender perspective at least, there is an understanding of why a woman does X and why a man does Y, and looks at situations very differently. So I think for me, I think going through a stage of education now with men within a business, or if it's around diversity, the same point, right? Education is key in all of this, in how we bring people together. And we, as an agency in particular, you are not representing fans if you're not diverse, because that's exactly who you're speaking to. So those are kind of the two side of things that I'm currently thinking about.
Great. Well, Siobhan, it's been lovely to have you on our podcast. Thank you so much for coming back in, and keep in touch.
Thanks, Nicky.
You can find our podcast on Spotify, Apple and Google Podcasts. Subscribe to never miss an episode.